In the matter of the people of the state of California versus Orenthal James Simpson, case number BA097.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you.
And we are back.
Ask what you
Welcome
can
to
do
Doomed
for
to
your
Fail, the
country.
podcast where we cover a historic and true crime story that is doomed to fail. We just did a true crime / sort of history podcast, and now we're doing the history only one with Taylor, who, if I had to guess, given that she chose coconut water, is going to cover a volcano today.
I am going to cover a volcano today.
There we go.
Good guess.
It was the Indonesian thing.
so- It's a lot of them are in Indonesia. So this one's from Indonesia.
Is that called the Ring of Fire?
No, I think that, well, yes. The Ring of Fire is like Indonesia and then like kind of up by like Hawaii and stuff. Yes, it is called the Ring of Fire, which is also an Octonauts episode. So I feel like I've learned a lot. Last week we talked about how I learned about cenotes from the Octonauts, and I also learned about volcanoes and the Ring of Fire from the Octonauts.
Sweet.
So definitely recommend. Yes, Fars, you're correct. Oh wait, do you want to do an intro?
Yeah, I did. This is Doomed to Fail. Is that?
Did you do that?
Yeah, I just did that.
Don't you do that for both? Oh, you did? Okay. So this is going to be shorter than usual for me because I could not finish reading the book I was reading. I have like an hour left. We are going to go back into volcanoes, and this is going to be pretty quick. I wasn't able to finish the book I was reading, but like the book I was reading is kind of about this global impact. So I have some fun stories that are affected by the fact that the weather across the whole entire globe was affected during this one. So today it's Volcanoes Part 3, the eruption of Mount Tambora and the year without a summer in 1816.
Sweet.
So because there was no summer, there was also no food. It was like a very, very bad year for the entire planet, all affected by this eruption in 1815 in Indonesia. Mount Tambora is a stratovolcano, which means if you cut it up, it looks like a cake. It's like layers of land, just has been like growing for millions of years. It's on the island of Sumbawa in Indonesia. It was part of the Dutch East Indies at that point. So it's like where the Dutch were like doing their slave trade and all of that. The 1815 eruption was the most powerful volcanic eruption in human history. So in recorded history, obviously like the other ones we talked about, like Mount Toba was more, but this was the biggest one that we've ever like been around for and have written down. It had a VEI, which is a volcanic explosivity index of 7. So I think we talked about that a little bit, that like it's like the Richter scale where every one is times 10.
Yeah.
So
it's way
just
worse.
to look at it's way worse. So a little table, like when a volcano erupts at a 0, it's technically classified as a Hawaiian eruption. So that's when like you see videos of like in Hawaii where it's a little bit of smoke, but it's like lava very, very slowly.
Right.
Like people don't really die because of lava because it can burn down houses for sure, but it doesn't like rush at you.
Right.
It's kind
You
of
get out of the
slow.
way.
Yeah. And then there's a Strombolian, a Vulcanian, a bunch of them, and then a 5 on the volcanic explosivity index scale is a Plinian, and Plinian is named after
Pliny the Elder.
Do you remember?
Pliny the Younger.
And Pliny, I think it's Pliny the Younger because he had the first-hand account of Mount Vesuvius.
Right.
So a number 5 is Mount Vesuvius, and then a number 6 is some other ones that we'll talk about in the future. So Krakatoa and Mount St. Helens, I think, was a 6. I'm looking at, no, Mount Helens was not a 6. That would have been way bigger. Krakatoa was a 6. And then obviously it gets worse and worse. An ultra Plinian mega colossal end of the world volcano is what Toba was. That's an 8. So
Wow.
Toba's an 8. A 6 is like Krakatoa, so like obviously still like huge. We've heard about it. Vesuvius is a 5, and then the an ultra Plinian super colossal is a 7, and that's what Tambora was. So, which means that like the ash plume can be about 20 kilometers in the air, and it makes a substantial change on the atmosphere in the whole world. So
Yikes, not good.
it was a big one. It was a big one. So there are 11 stratovolcanoes in California. I was looking up. There's none in Texas. I was like, how
That's
many volcanoes are
crazy.
here? There's a lot in like the obviously in like Washington State and like Oregon area. They have a lot of them as well. Um, so the main eruption of Mount Tambora was on April 10th, 1815. It continued to put ash into the air for months, and it was like the lava was like low and slow, but it was the ash that is the problem. The explosion was heard up to 1,600 miles away, and ash fell at least 800 miles away. So just like layers and layers of ash. The explosion, this is the one because the next one, I think the next one we'll do is Krakatoa, and Krakatoa was later in the 1800s. When that one erupted, they had telegraphs. And they were able to tell people what was going on, like over the airwaves. But in 1815, they did not. So kind of fun, kind of awful. People on all these islands around went outside because they thought they were being attacked. So like native tribes, Dutch people, everyone like went to the beaches because they were sure that someone was shooting a cannon onto their shore. Like
It's so
that's the sound that
confusing.
they heard.
Yeah, these things, these
Yeah,
natural disasters are so confusing because they don't happen frequently enough for your body and brain to register what the hell is going on. Like the first earthquake I had
exactly.
in LA, I was like somebody drove into the house. So there's no other explanation because your brain can't even process it.
Exactly. It's so confusing. So people thought they were being attacked and they didn't know what was happening because you just didn't know. And then like the explosions continued for days, and then the ash started to fall kind of all over. There was a village of Tambora that had like a native population that was destroyed by the pyroclastic flow. They've done a little bit of excavating there. They found like a house and a couple bodies, but there are people who died, kind of immediately because of that. There were small tsunamis that happened along all the islands nearby, and people for months, like the Dutch who were doing their trading and their ships like around these islands, saw like huge like iceberg-sized piles of ash, like in the ocean. They're just like
Jeez.
huge ash piles everywhere. They heard the explosions until July. It just kind of kept going. Um, it's estimated that there were 11,000 deaths from the volcano itself, and then 49,000 from post-eruption famine. But that number actually also goes up to 121,000 people dying from famine all over the world because of this. Um, Another kind of table that I have, like Mount Vesuvius killed about 2,000 people, because not a lot of people were there. People had already started to leave, but and it didn't have that like climate effect that Tambora did. So the Tambora eruption definitely is anywhere from 71,000 people to 121,000 people died from the effects of it.
Well,
So one of the first things that happened, so it happened in April 19 or 1815, but the year without a summer is 1816 because it took a while for like the actual full environmental impact to happen. But in 1815, all over Europe, the snow started falling and it was yellow and it was like brick red in the Alps. Isn't that crazy?
why?
Because of the ash and like the stuff from the volcano ash and particles that were still up in the atmosphere, they like joined in with the clouds, became the snow, and so it snowed these like crazy yellow and red colors in Europe.
Weird.
Um, and you don't know why. Also, like you don't have any concept that there was this volcano exploded in Indonesia. You just know that all of a sudden, um, the air is crazy and things are like the snow's weird and it's just continuous rain. So over a year later, 1816 is a year without a summer. And it's a year without a summer in Europe and North America. And this is kind of before we started studying the weather, which is crazy because it's not too long ago. It's like 200 years ago, but no one studied the weather before then because it's hard to predict the weather even now. Like shit happens that you don't expect. So, there could be, we can't 100% with certainty predict the weather. And people just thought that God controlled it. So they were like, yeah, if God wants it to be sunny, it'll be sunny.
Yeah,
And,
why
we can
research it?
pray for rain. Why research it? Like they didn't think that there was anything more to it than that. Like God controls the weather, so there's no reason to study it. And so there wasn't anything about it. So our founding fathers, actually, of course, it was like because they did a whole bunch of stuff in like many fields. But like Benjamin Franklin actually was the first person to like write down that he thought a volcano could affect weather across the world. So he was like, this is something that could happen, but he, didn't have any proof that it could happen. And then Thomas Jefferson, he wrote down the weather every day, and no one else did. So I mean, if they did, we don't have it. So we have a record of the weather in 1816 and really Thomas Jefferson's whole adult life. That's invaluable because we don't have weather records from that far back, you know?
I bet people made fun of him. Was like, what a nerd! He's writing down the weather, and now it's like invaluable information.
Exactly. I don't think anyone called TJ a nerd, but yes. No,
TJ.
John Adams probably did in a weird way. So in 1816, TJ and John Adams are both still alive. They don't die until 1826. So they're both like they're not president anymore. James Monroe was president, but they're like, thinking about it and writing about the weather because that's the kind of shit they wrote to each other about. They hated each other, but they were still in contact. And did you know that they both died on July 4th, 1826?
Yeah,
Like at
yeah.
2 hours apart. Yeah. So fun. So, um, what else? Not a lot of people did that. One thing that they would do that is so funny, and they say this several times in the book that I read. Oh, it's just called Mount Tambora and the Year Without a Summer. I'll put it in the notes, but they talk a lot about in the book, the effects that were happening on the whole world, and I'll talk about some of the things that culturally that happened. But one thing that they would do often is just ask the oldest person that they know, do you remember anything like this before? Like, because they didn't have any records. So they'd be like, oh, well, my grandpa is 70. Let's ask him, has he ever seen snow in June? And he'd be like, never. And you'd be like, this is crazy. Like that's the only way
Makes
they would do it. It's
sense.
like, do you remember rain this much? Do you remember this? Like, just ask the oldest person they know to see what they remember. Because nothing was really written down. So what was happening in 1816 is the particles from the volcanic ash from Tambora were up in the atmosphere, and they were reflecting the sun and causing the temperature to drop. So if the eruption had been less bad, but gone like higher, it could have been worse on the weather because the particles would be smaller, but then they'd have more surface area. Does that kind of make sense? So because the eruption was so huge, the particles were bigger, so they had a little bit like less
Oh, yeah, that
surface
makes
area
sense.
because the combined yeah. So it's the reflection that created it's them reflecting the sun back to the sun that made it so cold down on Earth. Um, people didn't know what was happening. So they thought that it was because of sunspots. And I looked up sunspots and oh my God, looking at close-up pictures of the sun is fucking terrifying.
It's
It's just
crazy.
like
It's a giant
it's just like
ball of fire.
this like inferno that we have that gives us light. It's so scary. So I was looking at sunspots and like we don't even 100% know what they are now. We think it has to do with the magnetic fields in the sun, which also is what happened in the movie 2012, right?
I was
Magnetic
I,
fields.
I was on the way. I was in an Uber yesterday, and I looked over, and it was like I kind of the car I was in was like super tinted, so I kind of look at the sun, and I was thinking about Oppenheimer, and I was like, one of these things just opened up in the middle of a city, like it's crazy to think about. It's a
Yeah. Yeah.
ball of fire.
So scary.
It's not even like a fireball. It's like it's a nuclear reaction that just never ends.
Uh-huh.
Sorry, I'm like
And it doesn't
derailing your
even,
story.
yeah. No, totally. No, it's scary. And I don't understand what sunspots are, magnetic field, all of that, but that's what they thought it was. It's not, it wasn't that, it was a volcano, but they could see sunspots during 1816. They thought that that was part of it. They also thought maybe it was the trade winds. They really didn't know. But in Europe during 1816, here's what happens this summer. People leave England in droves because England is soaking wet. It rains constantly. There are no days without rain in England over that summer. The harvest is totally destroyed. Corn doesn't grow, wheat doesn't grow. People have to decide, do we feed our animals? Do we feed ourselves? How do we survive during this time? The price of meat actually went down because people were selling their animals quickly because they couldn't afford to feed them anymore.
Wow.
So they would like sell their cows rather than have them like continue to eat. There were riots all over the big major cities. Some rioters carried flags reading bread or blood because they were starving. People were
Jeez.
starving all over. They were the food riots of 1816 and 1817 were the highest levels of violence since the French Revolution in France. It's the worst famine of 19th century Europe. It's like a couple of years before the Great Potato Famine of Ireland, but it definitely decimates the potato crops in Ireland as well. Other things in Europe that are going on, as we also know, Mary Shelley this is when she writes Frankenstein, and because they were stuck inside in Geneva,
Yeah,
it rained
yeah.
constantly. They had an absolute miserable time, and they were just like writing scary stories because they were absolutely miserable. Napoleon is still alive, which is fun. He's been to Elba and been back, and now he's on his second exile. I don't know why they don't just kill him, but he's still around.
I'm looking forward to that
So
movie
France
though.
is also dealing. Yeah, me too. I can't wait. So I also heard my friend Karen told me there's a movie about Napoleon that's old, that's like 7 hours long. That's like great.
Yeah, don't have
So I
patience
want
for
to like
that.
someday watch that. So Napoleon is still around, kind of talking to people, talking about the weather, talking about God, talking about being an emperor. In England, Jane Austen writes Persuasion. So a lot of good like art came out of this because people were stuck inside, and had to go back to reading and writing and painting and such. Um, the German inventor Carl Dries, he is trying to find new ways to get around without horses because people don't have any food to feed their horses. So he invents the velocipede. Velocipede? Anyway, it's the first bike. He invents the
Oh,
first bicycle during this time. Because he wants to get people to be able to transport themselves without needing animals,
that's pretty
essentially,
cool.
because of this. Yeah. So, there were in North America, it snowed all summer. In Massachusetts, in like Boston, it snowed in June in summer, and it like that's never happened before. Crops failed all over the Northeast. So these towns and people who were like living in towns and had businesses, their businesses closed, their crops failed, people moved out of towns. There were also like it's also a huge we're obviously like religious thing happening. People think, that God did it. So another thing that happened is a man who had a business in a town in Vermont that had ended up being like shut down because of the economy and because all the crops were failing. He moved to a town in New York where people were very, very, very religious, and he started to talk to them about religion, and that was John Smith. So that's when he started the
Oh,
Mormon church, and he had moved there, and people were like really riled up about God because of this time, because the weather was so bad.
it's like all connected. History's crazy.
Yeah, it's all connected. It's crazy. That's like the context. It's super fun. So, yeah, that is honestly all that I have. I know this is not my longest one, but it was a volcano in Indonesia, and you didn't know what was happening yet because you didn't have the communication yet. But you could see things in the sky, like the sky turned orange, and they do a little bit of like a backdating of like art and people who painted landscapes, and like the landscapes that they showed during this time were much more orange, much more yellow than they'd ever been before. And this is when people start to really like start thinking about the weather and like writing down pieces of the weather, and that will continue just to get better and better. But before then, like you knew basically, this is when we harvest, this is this and this, but you didn't have any idea that like a hurricane could come, or a tornado, or any of these like big weather events. You just didn't know yet, which I think is really interesting and scary to be like, oh, here's something new I've never seen before. Or I'm in the Alps, it's snowing, the snow is red. I'd be like, the devil is here.
Yeah,
Like, I don't know what
yeah.
else you could possibly think. If it started snowing like bright red, you'd be like, well, this is it. It's been great. But now it snows like blood, and I'm gonna leave. Like, I don't know.
It reminded me of you and Juan's pact with each other, where you're like, Juan, if I ever tell you that it's raining teeth in the backyard, you just have to believe
Mm-hmm.
me. And like that's what this was.
100%. Yeah. If I'm like, babe, it rained teeth all day, he'll be like, great, let's move. I'll be like, great, thank you for believing me and understanding that I saw teeth fall from the sky. And that, yeah. So, yeah, it's an interesting, like, creative year. And when the next one we'll talk about Krakatoa. That was in 1883. And that's when the world knew a little bit more about it. That's when Munch paints the Scream. Like, that's when we like start seeing more in art around the world. But Tambora is, I think, the most recent huge one that had like those global effects that people heard for like, thousands of miles and all of that. Like Mount St. Helens is nothing compared to this.
Yeah,
This one
and
is
that
is a
was
really, really huge one.
yeah. Is this
Mount St. Helens is 1980.
is this the context podcast? We're doing historical context on things.
Shit, I think that's all we've been doing. I think every story is context. So yes,
It is
it
interesting.
really
We're
is what it is.
both we didn't discuss our topics, and we kind of both settled. Well, it was Dan Carlin's fault.
It's all Dan Carlin's fault. Um, another thing. So this is number three of volcanoes. The last volcano that I will do is the future and what we think might happen if Yellowstone actually does erupt. But if Yellowstone erupts, it will be an 8, similar to Mount Toba, that destroyed a lot of humanity. I mean,
I
like
mean,
America will be gone. We'll all die.
it will happen, right? I mean, it's just a matter of like when it happens,
Yes,
because there is a
exactly. It will
volcano
happen.
there.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah. The Yellowstone super volcano. I mean, it'll happen someday. Hopefully, we'll be long gone, or maybe we'll be here. Maybe it'll be fun. We don't have to work anymore.
Yeah, it'll be like
For the
it'll be like Woody Harrelson.
day. Yes, we'll be like Woody Harrelson in 2012. That's exactly what we'll be like.
Just watch it
Or
coming.
or did you mean Woody Harrelson just like today?
No,
Like
in
what a crazy
2012.
man.
No, 2012.
Got it. Got it. Got it. Got
Yeah.
it. Got it. Yeah. Yeah. Crazy. It's cool also that when people are stuck inside, they create some cool art. At least like the richer people do. The
Yeah,
poor
the
people
poor
are
ones are
starving.
just trying to
But
survive.
the rich people are creating art, which is, a whole thing that when rich people are unemployed, they get to create art, or when they get to choose what they do, they create art. I get it. 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 But yeah, that's it. That's my quick story on Tambora. More volcanoes in the future. But yeah,
More volcanoes, more context.
more
Highly,
context. It's all connected.
it's all connected. Highly recommend. Please do go listen to Dan Carlin as well. And support all the things. Write to us, follow us, tell us what you think.
That's what you
And
think. Give us
if,
ideas.
and
Yeah.
if you see me walking around a coffee shop with a bunch of stickers, just take one.
Pick one. Get a sticker. Send us an email. doomtofelloppod@gmail.com. I'll literally just send you a sticker. I want more people to have one. Look, I have one on my phone. And then I thought, is it bad that I'll be taking pictures at a wedding from my phone with this Doomed to Fail sticker on it?
That is so fun. That is so
I feel a
fun.
smidge bad,
I
but
love it.
it is what it is.
I love it. It's awesome. It is what
It
it
is what
is.
it is. Yes.
I'm
Thank you,
gonna go check my
Fars.
mailbox. Thanks, Taylor. Well,
Please do.
have fun there, have fun in New York, have fun at the wedding, and have a safe
Yep.
trip back home. And I'm gonna go see if
Thank
I
you.
have stickers.
Woo.
Sweet.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead
Thanks,
and kill it.
everyone.